Hey, what's up guys? So this is going to be another power aerial tutorial for a pretty rare move that I don't think I've ever seen anybody else do. Like the last video, I'm actually going to start out with some preface, some other stuff about different types of things you can do in your practice that I think are going to help you develop your moves and your style and everything. And so if you want to get right into the tutorial, you want to skip to anything else, just like I put in the last video, I didn't mention that there are timestamps at the in the description. So at the bottom of the description, I'll have timestamps in there, so you guys can just skip through if you don't feel like listening to everything I'm blabbering about. The thing that I wanted to talk about before I get into the tutorial is I wanted to expand on that thing that I mentioned in the last video about doing one rotation in your throws, or one rotation or less. And the reason I gave in the last video was that you're going to be putting less force into your throw, which equals more control, but there's actually more to it than that, so I just wanted to break that down. To break it down, I would start off by just kind of explaining that there's three different major areas that you want to focus on when you're doing your throw, three different major joints, and that's your wrist, your shoulder, and your elbow. And so what you're trying to do is, to make this kind of style look the best, you want to be kind of moving your whole body as much as you can get into it. The better it'll look. But these three major places you kind of want all working together when you're doing your throw, because that'll give you the most control. And that's just because you can actually test this out with just a regular, just really standard throw, just into like a standard grip. Try doing it with just your wrist, and you'll notice that it's really hard to control. And then if you do it with your wrist, shoulder, and elbow all kind of working together, you'll notice that it's way easier. And I'm not gonna analyze this stuff because I'm not like a physical therapist for Balisongs, but what you're basically doing, I think, is distributing the motion between those three different areas so that you don't have to put so much movement into one area, especially the wrist, because it's such a small joint that the motion's very small but very hard if you try to do a throw with just your wrist. And so that very little kind of range of motion is going to make it really hard to control, because you have to do the Balisong's acceleration really quickly. On top of that, most of the rotation in your throw is going to come from your wrist, but the actual path that the Balisong goes in, so the actual force that governs the power aerial in general, can come from all three joints. So it's kind of a hack to lower the amount of wrist work that you have to do by lowering the rotations, but still doing a power aerial. So you can use all three joints where you have the most control, but you also don't have to do all that extra work with your wrist because you're doing less rotations, if that makes sense. So this is obviously something that people probably aren't already familiar with. It's kind of like a weird thing that I'm doing in my weird style. But once you do get used to it, you'll notice that there's different stages to your aerials they're really easy to control, and they'll feel really good. So you'll feel like an acceleration stage where you're getting that balisong to the speed you want it at once you before you do your release. And then the second half of your kind of leading up to the release is going to be like a gliding stage where you already, because you're spreading out that movement between your wrist, your shoulder, and your elbow, you have so much time that you can actually kind of just kind of glide the balisong and line up the release. And by the time you release it, almost like a basketball shot, you already know where it's going to go, and you know it feels good. All right, end rant. Let's get on to the actual tutorial for the Snatch, as I've recently called it. So this is a throw where you're going to be throwing from behind your back on one side, across your chest, kind of upward towards your head, and you catch it, or this is why I call it the snatch. You're going to be snatching it out of the air with your opposite hand on the opposite side of your body. As you're seeing me do it in the footage that I put up here, you can actually see that I do it in two different ways depending on which side I'm throwing it from. And the reason I'm doing that is because my body just isn't that flexible or coordinated. The different sides of my body have different kind of performances. and this isn't actually a bad thing. I'll get into that later. Now for the first variation, I actually throw it up, the balisong goes above my head, and I catch it on that opposite side of my body above my head. And this is kind of the most dynamic way to do it. It's actually the one that I prefer. I've heard people have said that they like the other one that I do. Definitely has a different feel to it. To me, this is my favorite one because it just looks like so high energy. And the other variation is this throw where it's the same thing, but when I throw it, the balisong usually goes in front of my face, and I actually snatch it out of the air while it's still in front of my face instead of above my head. And it looks a little bit more strict. It looks like a little bit tighter, and so it has its own kind of benefits. So from my quick description of those two different variations, you can see that there's kind of like trade-offs between the two different variations, and there's kind of things that are desirable about both of them. So the first one, where I throw it above my head, I like it a lot because if you really want like a catch to hit hard on a beat or something like that, that throw, since it has a lot of movement going on, looks really cool that way. But if you want something to be look quick and tight and like kind of strict, then that other throw, and strong, it also looks really strong, the other one where it goes in front of your face. So they all have like their different energies and their different kind of desirabilities. And I think that's kind of a fundamental thing of developing your own style. Is when you learn moves, it's almost like there's like mutations where you learn it a little bit differently, and your body kind of performs the move a little bit differently. And so what you can do is observe how you do those things. You don't have to think of them as mistakes. You can think of them as mistakes if you don't like the way they look, but you can also think of them as like innovations. So you can learn something, but learn it differently, learn it quote unquote wrong, but learn it in a way that actually looks cooler. Or when you do it on the opposite side, when you try to learn it on your other hand or something like that, you can do it differently and actually use that to vary your style. So I do the same move, but it almost looks like two different moves because my body can't actually do them the same on both sides. So instead of doing them identically, I actually do them a little bit differently, and that variation creates some nice like color in those combos. Okay, now I'm going to be going into the different things that I'd suggest you practice before you go into trying out the snatch. And obviously these are all optional. You can go right into the snatch if you want to. That might give you, like I said, that like I was talking about earlier, that like mutation effect where you might learn it weird and it might actually end up being cooler. But if you want to make it smoother and quicker to learn, then you can try out these different things that I think will familiarize you with what your body has to do to get the snatch down. So the first thing I'd recommend is practicing a behind the back throw. So in the last video I recommended a behind the back catch. In this one I recommend a behind the back throw, because in the halo the hardest part is catching that balisong. In the snatch the hardest part is definitely throwing it and getting it in the right place above your head, because you don't want to hit your face and you don't want to throw it like all wacky too far in front of you or anything like that. So getting that throw right is definitely the hardest part to the snatch. But the second thing that I'd recommend is actually something to get the throw down, and that is a Van Gogh. And the reason why I would recommend that you practice this is because some history is that I saw a guy, I think his name is Balamazu, on Instagram. I saw him do a catch. He did you can actually do this snatch as a catch, like a Van Gogh across the body catch. But the snatch is just where you just catch one handle and you keep going with your combo. So I saw this guy do the full catch, and I was like, actually I could just extend this into like more of a combo. So what you're doing is essentially a Van Gogh across the body catch, but instead of catching the whole thing, you're just catching one handle. So one way to practice the one handle catch is to practice the Van Gogh, and then practice doing the Van Gogh but only catching one handle. And that actually reminded me of something that I forgot to mention in the last section for the snatch, and that is that when you do the snatch, you want to focus on something that you kind of focus on when you're doing something like a wrist pass, and that is momentum management. So when you go to grab the balisong out of the air like that, the blade is going to stall out, and then it's going to snap back if you don't like kind of manage the momentum that you're switching. So you're going to be accelerating the balisong in the other direction when you catch it and pull it back like that. So you're going to have to pull. You're going to have to time your pull so that the balisong kind of stalls out and doesn't snap back on you. So that's one thing to look out for. That's why I recommend you use either a trainer or a dull balisong at first, so that you don't chop your hand a million times before you get this move down. But other than that, the only other thing that I might recommend you practice before you try out this move is actually the halo, because if you look at the path that the balisong has to go in, like across your body, past your face, into the other hand in the halo, it's actually basically half of this move. So if you know how to do the halo, you kind of know how to throw the balisong to do this move. You're just kind of interrupting that halo path. Alright, that's everything that I wanted to talk about for this video, and I think it's everything that you need to learn the Snatch. I am still kind of working on some different things to make these videos better. I'm thinking about moving on. Hopefully soon I can get enough of the basics down to move on to making like the visuals maybe more fun, maybe something like that, I don't know. I'm working on the audio, because today actually I think my MacBook built-in microphone was being weird because the audio was super low, so I had to plug in some Apple headphones, and I'm using that mic right now. And since that kind of moves around, the audio might be uneven in the video. I hope not, but that might be the case, so I'm sorry about that if that's what ends up happening. Otherwise, once again, I'll just let the Instagram post be the outro since I'm done talking. I'll see you guys later.